We do have a Truth Social statement that Tom referenced that we want to read for you now. This is President Trump on his Truth Social just a little while ago saying, "Quite an evening in D.C. Secret Service and law enforcement did a fantastic job. They acted quickly and bravely. The shooter has been apprehended, and I have..."
The first thing that didn't make sense about the White House shots was how quickly people were told to stop thinking about them. 3 cracks split the night air just outside the outer security zone. Sirens surged.
Agents moved. Streets locked.
Helicopters carved circles over Washington. For a few hours, the entire Capitol seemed to hold its breath. Then, almost as fast, the language changed.
Officials called it contained, isolated, a single threat. Nothing broader. Nothing organized.
But isolated events don't trigger sealed warrants in Maryland, Virginia, and Florida before dawn. And they definitely don't bring federal tactical teams crashing through the doors of a waterfront estate tied to a man who had spent years selling national security solutions to the people who feared chaos the most. At first, the story looked simple.
A shooter. A perimeter breach.
A close call near the most protected residence in America. The kind of case the public reduces to one face, one motive, one headline. That was the version moving across cable panels before sunrise.
Lone actor. Radicalized. Contained.
Inside the Washington field office, almost nobody serious believed it for long. The shell casings were wrong. The path of retreat was cleaner than it should have been. A traffic camera near the route blinked out for 91 seconds at exactly the wrong time. A burner phone found in a storm drain had never contacted political groups, manifesto forums, or extremist channels. Instead, it pinged 3 places no one expected: a catering warehouse in Alexandria, a short-stay apartment in Baltimore, and a private logistics office in Arlington registered to a defense subcontractor with no obvious reason to exist. That's when the case stopped looking like violence and started looking like infrastructure. Within 12 hours, the FBI pulled in DOJ prosecutors. ICE Homeland Security investigations flagged names from a visa fraud file they'd been chasing for months. DEA analysts saw one of the Baltimore addresses appear in an older narcotics transport matrix connected to pill diversion and synthetic opioid movement up the East Coast. On paper, those worlds had nothing to do with shots near the White House. In reality, they were about to collide. And right near the edge of that collision was a man named Nolan Cade. If you had seen him before the raids, you probably wouldn't have remembered him as dangerous. That was part of his value. Cade didn't look like a criminal architect. He looked like the guy networks invited on air after a major scare. Tailored suit, measured tone, ex-consultant posture, the kind of patriot branding that sounded expensive. He had built a reputation around crisis management, surveillance contracting, and asset continuity for high-net-worth clients and politically exposed organizations. He spoke in polished, careful sentences. He donated to veterans' causes. He sat on non-profit boards. He was the last man in the room anyone expected to be near a case like this. Which is exactly why agents kept circling back to him. One of Cade's firms had serviced camera systems used by multiple private contractors around D.C. Another had subcontracted event credentialing for secured venues. A third had no employees listed at all, but had moved $11.8 million through 2 regional banks in 16 months. When analysts mapped the phone data from the White House perimeter that night, one device mattered more than the rest. It had stayed dark before the shots. It lit up for 7 minutes after. Then it traveled west, not east, stopping briefly outside a boathouse property on the Chesapeake Tide, through 2 LLC layers, to Cade's holding company. That still wasn't enough for a raid.
Then Baltimore broke open.
Agents hit a brick row house just before sunrise, expecting a stash location. What they found looked stranger.
No drugs in the open.
No weapons laid out like a television search warrant. Instead, there were sealed boxes of blank ID stock, lanyards from federal access vendors, pre-loaded phones, and a printer calibrated for badge lamination. In the basement, behind what looked like a welded utility panel, a narrow hidden room opened into a climate-controlled rack of servers, blinking blue in the dark like they had been breathing down there for years. On one wall hung a map of D.C. marked with color-coded routes, delivery times, and hand-labeled zones around federal buildings. It was the first time the task force saw the system as a system. And it got worse when they interviewed Emma Ortiz. Emma was 21, a political science student who had rented her spare room in Northeast D.C. to 2 young men who said they were campaign interns working a temporary security detail.
They paid on time.
They wore polos with contractor logos. They left early, came back late, and once asked if they could receive event materials in her name because their office had mail issues. Emma said yes, because that's what normal people do when nothing looks abnormal yet. The deposits hit her account in neat monthly installments, small enough not to feel criminal, big enough to keep her from asking questions. When agents showed her still images pulled from a garage camera, she pointed to one of the men immediately.
He wasn't an intern.
He was the same person she had once seen stripping labels off shipping crates with a blade at 2 a.m. in her kitchen. Emma thought she had sublet to ambitious staffers trying to get ahead in Washington. What she had actually done was provide cover for a credential laundering node less than 6 miles from the Capitol. And Emma wasn't alone. As subpoenas rolled out, investigators found the same pattern in Arlington, Newark, Philadelphia, and Miami. Students, gig workers, temporary hires, new arrivals, people living one missed payment away from panic. They were recruited through fake internships, event staffing ads, and private security certification programs that promised federal placement. Some moved packages, some opened bank accounts, some signed lease documents. Most never saw the full picture. That was the design. Nobody at the bottom held enough truth to expose the top. But somebody at the top had built it with almost surgical discipline. Money started telling the story that witnesses couldn't.
14 shell companies, 6 states.
2 nonprofits used as civic stability fronts. More than $86 million washed through payroll processors, consultant retainers, invoice bundles, and cryptocurrency exits over 22 months. One chain ran through bulk medical supply orders that never reached clinics. Another hid inside event security contracts billed around political conferences and donor retreats. DEA traced portions of the same network to pill presses in Phoenix and precursor shipments routed through South Texas. ICE tied other pieces to overstayed training visas and fake compliance sponsorships. The White House shots, it turned out, sat at the center of a machine that was already feeding off several crimes at once.
Then the case flipped.
Until that point, agents believed the gunfire had been the objective.
Maybe intimidation. Maybe spectacle.
Maybe an attempted breach that failed. That theory died when analysts reconstructed the exact timeline of the lockdown against a truck movement in Alexandria. The moment the shots were fired, security protocols rippled outward exactly as expected.
Roads sealed.
Cameras redirected. Protective units retasked. Media attention swarmed the perimeter. And in that 11-minute window, a white refrigerated catering truck rolled out of a private warehouse less than 10 miles away, passed through a corridor that would normally have been heavily monitored, and vanished into Maryland. It wasn't carrying food. When federal teams finally found the truck 2 days later, stripped and abandoned near Salisbury, they recovered fragments of hard drive casings, a melted document safe, and chemically damaged binders containing partial personnel rosters, donor contact sheets, and visitor movement logs. The shots had not been the climax. They had been the distraction. That changed everything. Suddenly, the gunfire near the White House looked less like ideology and more like a time diversion protecting a data evacuation. Someone hadn't tried to make history. They had tried to buy time. Just enough of it to move records that could bury people far beyond one shooter, one location, or one arrest. And if that was true, then the shooter was never the real target. The real target was the archive. The archive led straight back to Nolan Cade. Investigators dug into his flagship company, Meridian Protective Systems, and found a structure designed like a maze. Public-facing contracts at the top, mid-level vendors beneath, disposable subcontractors under those. Each layer separated liability from control. Yet the same handful of names kept surfacing in metadata, document revisions, and internal approval trails. One belonged to a retired scheduling specialist who had once coordinated access windows for secure motorcade support contractors. Another belonged to a compliance director who quietly altered audit flags before outside reviewers could escalate them. Neither looked like a mastermind. Both looked like people who believed they were just shaving corners inside a bloated system. That may be the darkest part of cases like this. Massive criminal networks rarely run on movie villains alone. They run on respectable people making small compromises until the machine no longer resembles the country it pretends to serve. And still, even with all that, agents were missing one piece. Why fire near the White House at all if the real goal was extraction? They found the answer in Annapolis. At 5:06 a.m., FBI tactical teams moved on Cade's waterfront property while armored vehicles blocked the narrow approach road and a Marine unit from a neighboring base watched the airspace. The house looked quiet from the outside, glass, stone, marina lights fading with the dawn. Inside, it looked abandoned too quickly.
A coffee mug still warm, closet doors open, one desk cleared, another not.
On the lower level, behind a wine storage wall mounted on hydraulic rails, agents found the second hidden room. This one wasn't just storage.
It was command, floor-to-ceiling screens,
signal boosters,
cloned credential templates,
live transit dashboards, property files, political event calendars, a wall-size board mapping response curves for federal incidents, including how long it took different agencies to lock zones, reroute personnel, and reassign surveillance. On a center table sat a leather binder stamped with one internal phrase, contingency noise. That was Cade's term for manufactured chaos. The White House shots were listed as one of several noise events designed to force institutional overreaction while other assets moved unseen. Not every event involved gunfire.
Some involved bomb threats.
Some involved protests quietly pushed into flashpoints. Some involved data leaks timed to physical movement. The point was never just panic. The point was to turn attention into a weapon. And buried deeper in the files was the real product Cade had been selling. Leverage. Meridian wasn't merely moving contraband and washing money. It had been building profiles on donors, staffers, security personnel, vendors, and visiting power brokers for years. Who they met, where they went, what they owed, what they hid, who they trusted. The network trafficked in drugs and credentials because those paid. But the long game was influence.
Access, pressure, insurance.
The shots near the White House weren't random violence. They were the emergency procedure used when the leverage archive was at risk of seizure. That's when the human cost came into focus in a way numbers never could. One of the names in the recovered files belonged to Darius Cole, a 33-year-old Army reservist from Prince George's County who had taken side work hauling communications gear between private event sites. His wife told investigators he thought he was working for a patriotic contractor with government ties. He believed the uniforms, the paperwork, the rehearsed language. 3 months before the White House incident, Darius died in what had been labeled an accidental overdose in a motel off I-95. Reopened evidence suggested he had been drugged after asking why certain cargo cases were double-sealed and why no one ever unloaded them at the addresses on the manifests. He wasn't a gangster. He was a father trying to bridge a mortgage gap. Emma Ortiz wasn't a conspirator either. She was a student who thought proximity to power meant legitimacy. Instead, her apartment became part of a chain built to exploit trust itself. That's what made Cade dangerous. He didn't just hide inside the system. He understood exactly which people would never imagine the system could be using them. By then, Cade had already fled Annapolis. For 36 hours, the task force chased fragments, marina footage, charter records, fuel receipts, prepaid devices lighting up and dying across the eastern seaboard. He moved like someone who had rehearsed collapse before. That wasn't surprising. Men like Cade don't build exit routes at the end. They build them first. The break came from a detail so small it almost slipped past. A refrigerated van leased by one of his non-profits pinged a cold storage facility outside Richmond, one previously searched in a pill diversion probe the year before. When teams hit the site, they found Cade in a loading corridor wearing a delivery jacket over body armor, standing beside 2 duffel bags, a burned laptop tray, and a hard case packed with cash, passports, and 3 phones.
No speech, no standoff,
no grand final line. Just a man who had spent years choreographing confusion finally cornered in fluorescent light, looking smaller than the system he built. The arrests that followed stretched across 4 states. Contractors, couriers, financial handlers,
a visa sponsor,
a former compliance officer, a broker tied to cartel-linked chemical procurement. DOJ filed racketeering counts, fraud counts, weapons charges, obstruction, conspiracy, identity offenses, and corruption-related enhancements. More names stayed sealed. That alone told people in Washington what kind of blast radius prosecutors were still measuring. And even then, the final realization was hard to sit with. The mastermind behind the White House shots had not been driven by doctrine, revenge, or even spectacle. He was driven by opportunity. He saw a nation addicted to credentials, contracting, speed, and trust signals. He saw how easily patriotic branding could disarm scrutiny. He saw that if you built a network across agencies no single agency fully owned, you could operate in the seams for years. And when exposure finally came close, he used the oldest trick in organized crime: make everyone look one direction while the real cargo goes the other way. That is why the case kept echoing long after the headlines faded. Because the terrifying part wasn't just that shots rang out near the White House. It was that the trigger was only the smallest, loudest piece of a quieter machine. One made of invoices, passwords, event badges, fake internships, shell nonprofits, and people who mistook polished language for legitimacy. The bullets got attention. The paperwork built the empire. So here's the question that matters after all the raids, all the indictments, all the footage of agents storming gates before sunrise. If a system like this can hide behind contracts, flags, and professional titles, what's more dangerous, the person willing to fire the shots, or the network of respectable people who made sure those shots could be useful? If you were on that jury, what would you call Nolan Cade? A terrorist, a criminal CEO, or something even worse? Proof that the most dangerous attacks don't always begin with ideology, but with infrastructure?